So 2 years after I left Florida, about 2019, I found myself having a really rough time, trying to build something from nothing. I ended up working at a desk job that just completely had an impact on my mental and physical, which I didn't realize at the time, slowly but surely. I ended up falling in love in a same sex relationship. I was also on my journey trying to find God. And so that was complex within itself. I was going through so much mental from my own traumas that I was dealing with. My worst fear happened within the first year that I left Florida. My grandmother I got a call 6 months after I left about how sick she became, and just shy of a year of me leaving, my worst fear happened, and that was hard within itself. When it's like one of your favorite humans no longer there, that was a huge piece to the puzzle. And you're on your own trying to deal with it all. That was a challenge within itself. But there was so much going on, even when it came to the job I was working at, which was, I'll say it was UPS. And not only was I going through so much mentally, physically, emotionally, trying to figure it all out, trying to find myself, trying to figure out who I am. Brainwash is a real thing. So, however, which way you want to paraphrase it. But then we all know what impacted all of us, which was COVID-19. And so by the end of the year, the job I had been working at for the past year, UPS, I ended up leaving. The relationship I was in for the past year solid, year and a half solid, and then it was like, a 2-year relationship ended that. It was my fiance sold the house because the house was involved with both of us, and that seemed like the only option for the both of us at the time that we could agree on, that was the best outcome. In politics, I bring up politics because it affected my own family. So, not only that, I was working at a job where they were trying to tell me what I needed to do, like put a mask over my face, while everybody was sitting at home, and we were having a double season between the holidays and then COVID going into 2020. Or, I'm sorry, before the holidays, COVID, and it was just a complete, utter mess. And then following into 2020, meanwhile, they weren't doing anything on their behalf. They weren't spraying the belt. They weren't spraying all these boxes that have China written all over it. They weren't cleaning out these trucks or doing nothing. So, it was like a complete, it was like, I was coming to an end of a road where it forked and I had to pick left or right. And I already knew what was going to happen with the election. I already knew what was coming down the pipeline. I could just physically see what was happening. I mean, I and so we ended up selling the house in the beginning of 2020. Now, not knowing if I was making the right decision leaving Florida was something that was a key factor in my mind at the time. Because it's not easy to just get up and leave everything and anything you know. You do eventually miss it, and I wasn't at a point where I can just get up and go down south whenever I wanted to go see him. I couldn't financially afford it. So, working the agreement out with my now ex-fiance, at the time, with the house and all that stuff. If you listen to my last video, there was a deal that was made and it was, profitable. So we handled what needed to be handled after everything was all said and done. And in the midst of this, I'm trying to sell a house after I just broke up with this beautiful soul. My mind doesn't know what to think. The job I was working at was that's a whole thing within itself. COVID-19 was happening. The politics, all the tensions were getting so high at the time. And it was very clear to me that I needed to have a house on wheels, because I had no idea what I was going to do. I had no idea what was coming down the pipeline. All I knew is that this chapter, it was a door that was closing, and I wasn't sure what the next door was looking like. I was just going off of my intuition, crying out to the Most High, and trying to listen and go down the path that felt right. And the week after we sold the house, here I am jumping around like the hotels and whatnot, trying to buy a place on wheels. Looking up on Facebook, Craigslist, all of that. The situation was I had 2 dogs, and the thing was in my mind was, okay, I need to have something that's comfortable for them just in case I do need to pop up shop somewhere and start working. And if they're in the tiny home, I'm gonna say, if they're in whatever type of tiny home, I need to make it to where it's not so tiny to where they're comfortable. But I had a Subaru at the time. Well, I still have the Subaru. And so I knew that I couldn't haul nothing, meaning I didn't have a truck. I didn't have the option of going to buy a new vehicle or anything like that. The money that I got from selling the house, it was clear that it needed to be made to go towards my living situation, because in my back of my mind was, I'm going to go down to Florida since I hadn't seen the family in a while, because at this point in time it probably was like, there's been so many gaps, a year, 2 years that I've gone without seeing them, but at this time it had to have been like a year. And the whole homesick feeling is real when your body and your algorithm and everything is not there anymore. Eventually, you do start to miss, you do start to question things, especially when things aren't easy and it's difficult what you're going after. It's not an easy path. And so here I was staying at these hotels trying to figure it out, and then I found this one place in Kentucky that did have something that would work with what I was looking for in the financial area I can afford. So here I was making a trip. with my two dogs, and basically as much as I can hold in my car, because the stuff I did have ended up at a place to where I can only keep it there for so long. So here I am in Kentucky, probably, what was it, like 5 hours away. And me and this guy, I come and I check it out, and, it's at a storage unit, and I meet him there, and everything works, everything, is good to go. And so we make the deal. And he told me he'll help me get on the road, meaning I had a vehicle and I just bought a motorhome that both of them you need somebody to drive. So I got a U-Haul, a car hauler to haul my car, and he was going to help me set it all up. And so he looked at me before all this went into action. He said, have you ever driven anything this big? And I just looked at him like, not this big. Because the biggest thing I've ever driven up to that point was, I think it's like an F650, where it has like the 6 doors on it. When I was like 18. So I just looked at him like, no, not this big. And he's like, are you sure you can handle it? As he's like about to say goodbye to me, basically, after we get to the U-Haul and everything, because I hadn't really driven it. No, I didn't. I didn't drive it. We just let the engine run and all this stuff, and he showed me everything. But the thing is I was in a predicament to where it was like, all right, well, this is like the best option I've had. It's taken me like a week to get here. I can't keep spending money on hotel rooms, and I can't, you know what I mean? So it looked good in my eyes. And he says, well, good luck. And, because I told him, I said, I guess we'll see if I can handle it or not. So here I was making my mission back to the same area in which I was familiar with, but I ended up booking something that was like 30 minutes, an hour from where I was living, because it was next to the lake. And I wanted to be next to the lake, and I also wanted to pop up shop somewhere so I can get all my stuff arranged, get the motorhome filled up, get all my stuff in it, get it all situated, get comfortable with it. And here I was at this campground. Somehow I managed, the first day when I was coming back with the motorhome, I decided to pull over at a truck stop because it was starting to get dark. And I was like, you know what? I'll just sleep in it. I'll pull over. I'm not going to stress myself out riding through the night. As I'm sitting there and, I got a shower in and stuff, got the generator going and getting used to this thing. And as I'm sitting there, I watch, a semi pulling next to me and another one pulling next to me, because you got to understand, when I went to go pull into this thing, it was nobody really there. So I didn't look too silly doing it, because I had so much room to work with. I kind of just winged it in there, because I did reverse it back in. The first time I ever did that, and you have a car hauler, so you're 34 foot long. That's how long the motorhome is. And then you got the 16-foot car hauler, so you're 50 feet long all day. And then you got the tail, and I'm just glad there wasn't that many people there, because that was the first time I ever done back something up like that. And lo and behold, as I'm sitting there and I got the people next to me, the guy that goes to pull into the guy next to me to the left ends up backing right into the guy next to me. I said, oh, heck fire. I said, oh my gosh, this is why you were sitting here watching and paying attention. Man, I couldn't believe it. But before you know it, I end up at this campground. And then there's this fella that I ended up, getting to know. And him and his girlfriend at the time, or whatever they were. And he really helped me out a lot. Meaning, he had been living this lifestyle for years now. He actually had been staying at the campground for a couple years. And so he was telling me tricks as well, like within the motorhome that I still use to this day. When it comes to the aux battery, the main battery, I mean, he was helping me lighten the pilot manually just in case the pilot light don't want to light. I mean, there were certain things that, he was showing me how to hook up directly, because these things I didn't know. I didn't know nothing when I bought this thing. I just was going on a limb. And the fact that I even ended up in a motorhome that you have to actually physically drive was not something I was just jumping right into, but it was the only thing that was lining up. So I went with it. And before you know it, here I am going down to South Florida. And when I tell you, my arms were so sore by the time I got done getting down there from holding that thing, keeping that steering wheel straight, and especially, going through like Asheville and whatnot. I mean, and then, you get down to Florida and people are not polite, at least not like when I grew up. And so they don't want to get over when you have your blinker on. And, whoo-wee. I will say this, that God is so good, because I got all the way down to Florida. I went to the U-Haul place that my grandfather was going to meet me at, because he was going to drive my car, I was going to drop the U-Haul off, and I was going to park my motorhome on his property anyways. When I get there, this is where that man that I just told you about at that campground comes into play. My battery starts like dying down on me on the motorhome, okay? I had no idea what was going on at the time. But that guy showed me a trick. When it comes to your dual auxiliary batteries, when it comes to your main batteries, and there's a button that you can use to jump it to where you can hold power on it. And lo and behold, I'm sitting here having to hold this freaking button, trying to get this U-Haul trailer in the right spot, reversing a 34-foot motorhome, trying to get this car hauler off and in the right area at the U-Haul that doesn't have that much space around. And then I'm trying to hold this button while I'm trying to look out the mirrors, and the buttons, like all the way over here. And I'm just like this, because, the motorhome, it's big. But that's where dude comes in play about that campground, because if he never, if I was never at that campground, and if he never showed me these little things, but let me get to the point. I end up going down to Florida for 2 months. It was an amazing trip because I got to spend it with my grandfather, but it was a horrible trip because this was, when everybody had highly opinionated political views and what people should be doing with their body, and mandates trying to be forced onto people, and families falling apart because y'all know what I'm saying. It wasn't a beautiful time in my own family because, God forbid you think different, you have your own opinion, you have your own thoughts, you have your own brain, so it was a bad experience at the same time. So that's why I was like, screw this, I'm out of here. Because initially, I ended up on a neighbor's property right next to my grandfather, who was a seasonal guy, who had been a seasonal guy for like 30 years, and he had a big enough lot and RV hookup. So I eventually went over there for a month. I was at my grandfather's for a month and over there for a month, but I could walk to my grandfather's. I mean, it was right there. I could throw a rock at him. And so it was the most magnificent experience, because if you don't know, I haven't had my grandfather my whole life. And when I just told you I lost my grandmother, it was the most beautiful experience to get to build this relationship with this man that I met when I was 16, 17 years old, and watched him give my grandmother her happily ever after. Like, the gratitude I have for this man is more than I can express. And so getting able to spend those 2 months with him was like the most beautiful blessing that God gave me, because when it comes to men in my life, it hasn't always been the best relationships. But this man right here, because my grandfather that I did have my whole life, he passed away just a few years before this special 2 months of my life with this man that hasn't always been in my life. My grandfather passed away in 2015 of December, and this was, shy of 5 years later, after I lost my grandmother that was married to this man, that I ended up on the property that him and my grandmother that were building together. So not only was I with this man and got to experience how beautiful of a human he is, and why and how my grandmother loved him so much, because I can relate to why she loved him so much, because a pure heart is rare to come across. But not only that, I got to spend time on this land that them two worked together, that them two were building together. And so I took advantage of that, and I spent a lot of time with them in that 2 months, because God blessed me enough to where financially, I had a little bit in my pocket to where I can actually invest the time with him. And of course, I tried helping him as well, like with what I could around the house and the property for him. And prior to this experience, we weren't as close. And 4 years, 5 years after this experience, we're closer than we were then. But that 2 months was a huge impact in my life. And I needed that love and that comfort, that understanding, that person I can actually have a dialogue with, the one that will actually listen to me and not bash me. It was a very huge pivotal moment. But before you know it, I was getting called back up into the mountains. And I had this was okay. I had made arrangements to go to Mississippi for a concert from Ryan Upchurch, and he canceled that for whatever reason. This is important. And then I said, okay, they were supposed to be like Redneck Mudfest or something like that in Georgia, with like Demon Jones, Adam Calhoun, and like Jelly Roll or something like that. So I said, okay, I'm going to book that instead because I was going to hit that on the way back up to the mountains. This is where my motorhome dying comes into play. I was starting to make this journey. And let me tell you, this journey did not start off good. Not only did when me and my grandfather go to refill the gas before, the propane gas, before I started this journey, I didn't secure the awning because it's a manual awning and it's a 30-year-old motorhome. It's in good, it was in great condition. 65,000 miles on the motor, 454 big block engine. I needed to zip tie the awning because, it's an older one, so it's manual, the arms and all that stuff. You have to lock them into place, and it's not a computer, and it's not a push to go out, push to go in. And so I didn't think it through. I knew that there was zip ties on it before, but I was using the awning when I was parked. So as I'm going over the bridge in Lake Okeechobee, going into town, the wind hits and it grabs the awning but luckily the propane is like 2 minutes right up the road. So we just get there, I slow down and we just get there, and then I zip tie it down while they're trying to fill up the propane tank. But the day I went to go actually leave, I have my grandfather's mirror that he made hanging on a door. And it was like about the same spot as that freaking awning. That mirror. Pew, within 10 minutes, 15 minutes of me leaving to start this long journey back up to the mountains. But before you know it, I'm in Georgia. And all of a sudden, my motorhome just dies down. Done. That trick I had, it ain't working no more. I mean, it's trying to give it power, but it's not holding the power. Okay? Before you know it, I'm calling AAA. AAA is like, nope, it's not the battery. It's the alternator. And I said, okay. I said, well, do you know anybody? You got a buddy? And he goes, yeah. And I said, all right, well, can you call Buddy? And so AAA buddy calls his buddy. And then Buddy comes out, and I'm on the side of the highway with 2 dogs in a 34-foot motorhome with my car on a car hauler in the back. Before you know it, I didn't mention, while me and this AAA guy are trying to figure all this out, I had a window. I had a window cracked. And if I had read the label right there next to the window, it said closed window when you're operating the door going in and out of the motorhome, not next to the steering wheel, the other door of the house. So in the midst of that, I didn't shut the door all the way, and the wind grabs it, and then it shatters the freaking glass. And the glass is like, probably like that, because it's the windows that go out like this. And it's like the quarter of the big window, the bottom quarter of it. So now, dude just looks at me, because I look at him like, after I heard that boom, I walked out, I opened the door, and I saw all the glass. I just looked, and he was like, and I looked up at him, he's like, it's gonna be okay. It's gonna be okay. It's gonna be okay. And I just was like, call Buddy. Get old Buddy. Tell me what Buddy's, Buddy comes out. And it's the alternator. And so at this time, it's getting pretty dark. It's getting late. To the point where you just have a couple hours, a few more hours of the auto parts stores being open. Because I think it was 5 o'clock. Like, I don't know. It was getting pretty dark. Because by the time dude left me, it was getting pretty dark. Because he was on the mission to go and find this alternator. And that comes back to how God good is. Because God was trying to let me know the universe, the Most High, however which way you want to resonate with it, was trying to inform me of this alternator before I even got parked at my grandfather's. He was letting me know because I got all the way to the U-Haul, and the U-Haul was about 15, 20 minutes from my grandfather's. And that was when, after this long journey of coming down south, of a 12-hour trip, drive time, in a normal car would have been. But here I am. Broke down on the side of the road with 2 dogs. I ended up putting them in the car while he's trying to change the alternator. He done went to multiple spots. He couldn't even get the right year of the alternator, but somehow this man made it work. This man made it work. But I get off that night, get off the side of the road. I end up finding some spot that was a pretty good spot to pull into. And I did, popped up camp for the night. I mean, I took a shower and everything. Started that generator right up. I mean, but lo and behold, the next morning, I'm over here thinking I'm about to go to this 3-day weekend mud artist fest. No. I get 20 minutes up the road, 10 minutes up the road, and all of a sudden my car or the motorhome ain't getting power like it should. So here we are, me and this dude back at it again. And we cannot figure it out the next day. We're doing hours trying to figure this bad boy out. Hours trying to figure this thing out. Is it the gas line? Is it this? Is it that? Blah, blah, blah. As we're sitting here driving it around, I'm like, and I got my dogs in the back of on the car hauler in my car, and I would turn my car on so they can have some AC because it was during the heat of the year. And so after we're doing these, finally I said to him, I'm like, dude, I feel like it's like right here because the engine is right in between the driver's seat and the passenger seat. It's right in the middle. And so we get back to where we were at, and then we take the lid off and we look at it, and you got to understand, when he was putting this alternator in, it was dark. And I was like holding up my phone light, my flashlight on my phone and whatnot. Like, I'm so glad I videotaped a bunch of this with him, but I haven't watched it in a long time, and I haven't been on my, yeah. But one of the wires ended up being a little loose. And so here I am in Georgia, like 24 hours after I left, which was not far that I made it. I made it about 6-8 hours away, and I should have already been where I was supposed to be. But obviously, there was a reason why I wasn't there. There was a reason why I didn't go to Mississippi and that concert was canceled. There was a reason why I ended up in the exact spot in which I ended up that led me down to a AAA man that knew a buddy that got me in contact with him, because them two were my little angels. When you're a single woman at, how old was I? 26, 27 years old, 26, 27 years old, with two dogs in a motorhome and your car on the back of the car hauler. I mean, it could have ended very badly. But here I was, and the grace of God's miracles happening right in front of me. And now, where I was going was going to be, I don't know. I didn't care, but it was going to be a campground if it had to be once I got back up here. But my best friend's mom gave me the offer of parking my motorhome in the back of her place, which was a tight, it just fit. 34-foot long is pretty long. It's a lot longer than you think, especially when you got to drive it. Getting that motorhome prevented me from going right back into the toxic environment in which I had originally escaped from. If I didn't get that motorhome that I'm still in to this day at this moment, there ain't no telling where my life would be. And even though I had no idea what was in store for me when I left my ex-fiance, I left my job, my good union job. We sold the house that we, had a great deal on, 3-bedroom, 2-bath, perfect view of the mountains. I mean, it was a great spot, great view. I mean, broke this girl's heart, that broke my heart, but I knew there was a lot more at play, and that's a whole nother story within itself. Here I was walking away from everything I had just created in the past couple years. Even though my family, when I was down there for those 2 months, even though I may have saw some of these family members once, and I mean immediate family members, once or twice, because of the hatred and the grudge and the politics and the this and the that and the oh, your views, I don't like them, or you think differently, so I don't respect you. You better think like me because that's how it's I'm right, you're wrong. You know what I mean? 2019, 2020, like the end of night 2019, 2020. What a time to remember. And it's incredible because there's so many stories about people and similar situations when it comes to their families that I went through just because of how things were being handled around us, that were putting pressures on people, that were making people act out of character, that were really showing people's true colors, that were really mind-boggling to me how easily family members that are supposedly love you can act. And 2019 and 2020, boy, was that the beginning of an eye-opening season for me. Even though it was one of the hardest things I've ever had to deal with. Because it hurt. because I'm not going to sit here and bash you the way you may think, feel, whatever. But I also had that opportunity to embrace that 2 months with my grandfather without being a nuisance to him, because I had my two dogs that were my responsibility, that were my kids, but yet I still provided them a home and me a home. I was still trying to. Home has been a hard understanding for me. And when you try to, build a home that is an environment in which you actually want to be in, if I didn't buy this motorhome, I wouldn't have my own home. That's just from talking years after this. Because I haven't always been in this motorhome throughout these years since I brought it back up to the mountains. But bringing it back up to the mountains started a whole entire another new journey within itself. Being able to even be up here in these mountains helped me spend time with my niece, and now my niece is at a young age. That job that sat there and I gained 50 pounds from in 1 year was the job that led me to the house that I ended up being able to buy with my ex-fiance now. My fiance at the time, girlfriend, however which way you want to say it. Even though that job was rough, I still got that house, and selling that house got me into a home on wheels that brought me back down to Florida so I can actually truly understand at the time who was really there for me. And that being down in Florida was not where I needed to be. It did not feel right. My family didn't care that I was there. I didn't even see them. It was hard to go through at the time, but it was also very eye-opening for me that I needed to see. And that was my clear understanding that I'm not welcomed here. I don't care who you vote for. I don't care what you think. I don't care what your beliefs are. Like, when it comes down to it, I don't care, because I'm still going to respect you as a human and show love and respect. You know what I'm saying? Like, and if you can't give that back to me, then that's on you. I'm not going to sloop down to your level after fighting with y'all for so many years. And even though it was a hard experience to go through, I had a man right there next to me that showed me nothing but unconditional love. And I cherish this man so much to this day. But me losing my grandmother built me and this man's relationship even more. It drew me and him so much closer to each other. The hardest thing I had to deal with, it was losing my grandmother. Was when your worst fear happens to you, that was the one thought I had leaving Florida. After just losing my grandfather a year and a half before I left Florida, was knowing that my grandmothers and my grandfather, well, it was really my grandmothers, were getting older. And then it happened, and yet it all led up to, even to this day, a man that I can't wait to hear his voice. I love hearing him sing to me. I love hearing him crack jokes. I love just hearing the tone of his rasp in his voice. And it was like, even though my parents, my family did me dirty, you find out who you're real, who, even though my grandfather ain't my blood, that's my family. You know what I mean? And God has been behind this whole time. Co-creating with the universe has been behind this the whole time. So much of this was me just going with my intuition, with what felt right, trying to do the right thing. I had no idea if I was capable of jumping into a motorhome 50 feet long, having to pull my car with it. I had no idea if I was capable of this. But here I was, just throwing myself into it because I'm just I'm just trying to ride the wave in a sense. I mean, it's very spiritual, but I'm trying to put it into words to where you get what I'm saying. But this is me years later looking back on it, where I have more of an understanding why things were happening. And that wasn't the only time I was able to have the 2 months with my grandfather. But that was the first time I got to experience this. And it is something I will always cherish because I never experienced him as a little girl. I never experienced him growing up. And then you look at just the motorhome, even though God was trying to warn me about the alternator, it's a example of me not listening and following through and investigating or anything because I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know anything about the motorhome. There was so much going on at the time. I was just like, like when you're trying to do it all, there's only so much you can do. So he put me in the right spot at the right time. Even though I ended up not being able to go to 2 different concerts in 2 different states. Obviously, I wasn't meant to go the direction of Mississippi, and obviously, I wasn't meant to go to this 3-day, 2.5, Friday, Saturday, Sunday event. For whatever reason, I don't know. All I know is I paid for it, I wasn't able to go, and there's a reason behind it. But all these years later, I don't understand why people fear God. Fear is the total opposite of which God is. God is love. And through all of this, it has been the most challenging thing to stay in a place of love when you've overcome so many obstacles within the people that supposedly love you. And at this time in my life, This was a big pivotal moment that showed me true colors of people that supposedly loved me, even though I had no recollection of it at the time. I just would give people the benefit of the doubt because they're your family, right? But when God works in mysterious ways, it is so hard to understand why you're going through what you're going through. And some of the toughest times I've ever experienced in my life, I look back on and I'm just like, wow. Well, maybe I'll tell you what happens when I get to North Carolina next.